Welcome to Spine Chillers, where we delve into the darkest corners of horror and mystery. I'm your host, Ilona, and today we're diving into a case that has haunted the whispers of folklore for generations. Buckle up and dim the lights because this story will send shivers down your spine. Our tale today is about the boy who saw too much. Drake was different. From a young age, he'd seen things others couldn't. Shadows that writhed with life, whispers that carried the weight of centuries, and a power that pulsed within him, a raw, untamed energy capable of bending reality to his will. It was a gift, a curse he never asked for, and one he never fully understood. His life was a constant tightrope walk between normalcy and the abyss. He learned to mask his abilities, to live as ordinary as possible. But the quiet life was shattered when a series of gruesome murders rocked his small town of Ravensbrook. The victims, their bodies bearing the marks of a supernatural force, were a chilling echo of his own hidden world. The first victim was found in the woods, her body eviscerated, limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Her eyes had been gouged out, and her mouth was stretched into a silent scream. Her entrails were draped over the branches like grotesque Christmas decorations. The police were baffled, the town gripped by fear, but Drake knew. He knew the darkness that lurked in the shadows, a malevolent entity feeding on terror. He was drawn to it, a moth to a flame, compelled to confront the evil that had seeped into his world. He had seen glimpses of this entity in his dreams, its form shifting and changing, always accompanied by a sense of impending doom. One evening, after another grisly discovery in the town square, an entire family, their skin flayed and arranged in a macabre display, Drake decided he could no longer sit idle. He made his way to the police station, hoping to offer his unique insight. "Officer Reynolds," Drake began, his voice steady but with an edge of urgency. "I think I know what's behind these murders." Reynolds, a grizzled veteran with a permanent scowl, looked up from his cluttered desk. "Kid, unless you've got solid evidence, I don't have time for fairy tales." Drake took a deep breath, his mind racing. "It's not a person. It's something else, something not from our world." Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Just listen," Drake pleaded. "I've seen things that aren't human. Shadows that move on their own, voices that speak in languages long forgotten. This isn't a regular killer, it's supernatural." The officer sighed, clearly skeptical, but intrigued. "All right, let's say I believe you. What do we do about it?" Drake hesitated, then said, "We need to go to the old mansion on the edge of town. It's connected somehow. I felt its pull." Reynolds frowned, but nodded. "Fine, but if this turns out to be a wild goose chase, you're spending the night in a cell." Drake and Reynolds set out for the mansion, a looming structure that had been abandoned for decades. As they approached, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist towards them. "Do you feel that?" Drake asked, his breath visible in the frigid air. Reynolds nodded, gripping his flashlight tighter. "Yeah, something's not right." Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of decaying rooms and dark corridors. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic and sharp. As they ventured deeper, they heard a faint whispering, like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. "Stay close," Drake whispered. "This place is a nexus, a gateway to another dimension." Reynolds glanced at him, disbelief etched on his face, but he followed without argument. In the heart of the mansion, they found a room that seemed untouched by time. At its center was a large, ornate mirror. "This is it," Drake said, his voice trembling. "This is the portal." Before Reynolds could respond, the mirror began to ripple, and a figure stepped through. It was the entity from Drake's dreams, a grotesque amalgamation of shadows and nightmares, its eyes burning with inhuman malice. Its body was a mass of writhing tendrils, dripping with dark ichor, and its face was a shifting, contorted mask of agony. "Welcome, Drake," it hissed, its voice a chorus of agony. "I've been waiting for you." Reynolds raised his gun, but the entity merely laughed, a sound that sent chills down their spines. With a flick of its wrist, Reynolds was thrown across the room, slamming into the wall with a sickening crunch. Blood oozed from his broken body, pooling on the floor. His limbs were bent at impossible angles, bones protruding through his flesh. Drake stood his ground, his mind a battlefield where reality and nightmare clashed. He summoned his power, feeling it surge through him, a raw, untamed force. He lashed out, and the entity recoiled, its form flickering. "You cannot defeat me!" it snarled. "I am the collective fear of humanity, and you are my puppet!" Drake's vision blurred, the room spinning. He realized with horror that the entity was right. His power, the very thing he relied on, was feeding the creature. Every attempt to fight back only made it stronger. "Stop!" he shouted, clutching his head. "I won't let you win!" But it was too late. The entity enveloped him, its essence seeping into his very soul. Drake felt himself changing, his humanity slipping away. He screamed, a sound of pure agony, as the darkness consumed him. In a final desperate act, he unleashed the full extent of his power. A cataclysmic explosion of energy that shook the very foundations of reality. The mansion crumbled, the ground trembled, and the sky turned an unnatural shade of crimson. When the dust settled, there was nothing left. No Drake, no mansion, no town, just an empty expanse, a void where hope once resided. But in the heart of that void, a new entity was born, a being of pure, unadulterated evil. It was Drake, transformed, corrupted, and infinitely more powerful. And it was hungry, very hungry. The world was plunged into eternal darkness, a realm of unending terror where nightmares became reality. Streets ran red with blood, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. Bodies were mutilated beyond recognition, and screams of agony echoed through the night. The new entity, now a god of fear and shadow, began its reign of terror. Cities fell, civilizations crumbled, and the world was engulfed in chaos. The nightmares that once haunted the corners of Drake's mind now roamed freely, preying on the living. Skin was peeled from bones, organs harvested and strewn about like grotesque trophies. Entire families were torn apart, their bodies displayed in horrific tableaux of death. Survivors whispered of a figure that walked among the ruins, a man with eyes like burning coals, whose very presence brought madness and death. They called him the Shadow King, a name that spread fear and despair wherever it was spoken. One night, a group of rebels gathered in the remnants of an old cathedral, their faces etched with determination and fear. "We have to stop him," said Maria, their leader, her voice steady but filled with desperation. "We can't let this darkness consume the world." "But how?" a young man named Tom asked. "He's too powerful. We've seen what he can do." Maria's eyes hardened. "There has to be a way. Legends speak of an ancient artifact, a mirror that can trap souls. If we can find it, maybe we can imprison him." The group set out on a perilous journey, facing horrors beyond imagination. They battled grotesque creatures, navigated treacherous landscapes, and lost many of their own. Gutted bodies were strewn across their path, and their friends were torn apart by monstrosities that defied comprehension. But their resolve never wavered. Finally, after weeks of searching, they found the mirror in the ruins of the old mansion, now a place of unimaginable horror. As they approached, the ground shook, and the air grew cold. The Shadow King emerged, his form towering and menacing, his body a mass of writhing, dripping tendrils. "You cannot defeat me!" he roared, his voice a thunderous cacophony. "I am fear incarnate!" Maria stepped forward, holding the mirror high. "You were once human, Drake. Remember who you were." The Shadow King hesitated, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. But the darkness was too deep, the corruption too complete. With a deafening roar, he lunged at them. In that moment, Maria activated the mirror, its surface glowing with a blinding light. The Shadow King screamed as he was drawn towards it, his form writhing and twisting. For a brief, agonizing moment, Drake's human face emerged, a look of sorrow and regret etched upon it. "Forgive me," he whispered, before being sucked into the mirror, his screams echoing into silence. The world began to heal, the darkness receding, but the cost was high. The survivors mourned their lost loved ones, and the scars of their ordeal would never truly fade. The mirror was hidden away, a reminder of the horrors that had been unleashed and the sacrifices made to end them. Until next time, sleep tight.